which would lead by the federal government of Nigeria. Though the union is yet to make an official pronouncement, the decision was taken at the end of a National Executive Union meeting which was held at the ASU Secretariat in Abuja on Thursday. The meeting was called by the union to determine its next line of action after its state branches met over a Court of Appeal verdict last week. The Court of Appeal had mandated that ASU end its strike before it can hear its appeal of the ruling compelling lecturers to return to work. The Nigerian youth, mostly students, have been gravely affected by the ASU strike, which brought about a deadlock in the educational system and may lead to long-term disadvantages. According to sources, ASU President Professor Emmanuel Osadeke had said the union could call off its strike in a few days after the overnight discussions with the government. Professor Osadeke said, I quote, "In a few days, we will put this strike to an end. Let all of us work in together, and the members of the House of Representatives working together put a beautiful end to this thing we have started so that every Nigerian will be proud that we, the universities, can be proud of." ASU President is expected to release an official circular to its members' institutions for the resumption of academic activities in the universities.
Let's stay now in West Africa, where we talk Burkina Faso. 2 weeks after a second military coup took place in the West African country, the leaders came together, representatives of the army, police, customary, religious organizations, civil society, as well as trade unions and political parties, sat down to nominate a new transitional president for the West African nation. The rest of the story is with you, Futso.
National meetings opened Friday, October 14 in Burkina Faso to appoint a transitional president 2 weeks after a second coup in 8 months that brought Captain Ibrahim Traoré to power. These meetings will bring together representatives of the army and the police, customary and religious organizations, civil society, trade unions, parties, and internally displaced victims of the jihadist attack that have hit the country since 2015. According to the chairman of their organizing committee, Colonel Major Celestin Compaoré, their objective is to examine and adopt the transition charter, designate a transition chairman in accordance with the charter, and collect any proposal for the proper transition march. On January 24, soldiers led by Lieutenant Colonel Paul Henry Sandaogo Damiba and regrouped within a military government called the Patriotic Movement for Safeguarding and Restoration overthrew President Rochmark Christian Kabore, accused of incapacity in the face of the jihadist attack, which have multiplied in Burkina Faso. They have not ceased in 8 months, and faced with the constant deterioration of the situation, a new coup took place on September 30, which brought to power a young 34-year-old Captain Ibrahim Traoré in order to refocus the transition on security emergencies, according to military power. Officially appointed president shortly after taking power, Captain Traoré assured that he will only expedite current affairs until the appointment of a new civilian or military transitional president by national assize. It should be noted that regular attacks by armed groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group have killed thousands and caused the displacement of some 2 million people since 2015.
J. Futso for that report. Just to reiterate that a few hours after the National Forum kicked off on Friday in Burkina Faso, the coup leader Captain Traoré was unanimously named president of the transition, and the representative also adopted Article 4 of the charter, stressing that the term of the transitional president will end once the leader elected in or after the 2024 presidential race will be sworn in, and of course the president of the transition is not eligible for the presidential, legislative as well as municipal polls that will be organized to end the transition period. Let's now talk the African continent as a whole, where history once again has repeated itself as at the United Nations meeting, 26 African countries voted in favor of the resolution rejecting Moscow's controversial referenda in 4 Ukrainian regions, while 19 others abstained. The rest of the story is with you, Jay Futso.
The Central African Republic, Ethiopia, the Republic of Congo, South Africa, Sudan, Uganda, and Zimbabwe were among the African countries that abstained. Eritrea, which had previously voted to reject a UN resolution condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine, also abstained. 3 of these countries hosted Russian diplomatic chief Sergei Lavrov during his tour of the region in July. Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, and Sao Tome were absent from the assembly. The General Assembly of the 193 member states had met in an emergency meeting. It adopted the resolution with 143 votes in favor, with 5 countries against and 35 abstaining, including China, India, Pakistan, and South Africa, despite diplomatic efforts by the United States. The 5 states that voted against were Russia, Belarus, Syria, North Korea, and Nicaragua. Earlier this month, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba toured Africa in an effort to counter Russia's apparent hold on the continent. The goal was to persuade leaders to support Kiev. He was forced to cut his visit short after Moscow intensified its bombing of Ukraine.
We move away from that resolution and we now talk climate change. Still on the African continent, where climate change experts from the African continent say African countries should arrive at the 2022 United Nations Climate Change Conference, acronym COP27, with an agenda to reframe the climate change debate in order to better benefit the African continent, which is most vulnerable to the impact of climate change, yet contributes low greenhouse gas emissions. Africa is home to some 17% of the world's population but contributes 2 to 3% of its carbon emissions. And from November 7 to November 18, 2022, Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt will be hosting global leaders at the COP27 summit, which will be a World Leaders Summit. We now take you to the northern part of the African continent, where we are talking dialogue in Sudan, where a rebel group operating in Sudan's Nubu Mountains has handed over 9 prisoners of war to the Khartoum authorities. The transfer was done on Thursday after neighboring South Sudan's mediation potentially boosted chances for the 2 sides to reach a final and permanent accord. Take a listen to the details of the story.
A rebel group operating from Sudan's Nubu Mountains has handed over 9 prisoners of war to Khartoum authorities. The transfer was done on Thursday after neighboring South Sudan's mediation potentially boosted chances for the 2 sides to reach a final and permanent accord. The 9 men who were being in captivity of Sudan's People Liberation Movement North, the SPLMN, were handed over to Sudan's ambassador in South Sudan, Jamal Malik, in South Sudan's capital, Juba. They were captured last month after heavy battles in Sudan's South Kordofan province and were being released on humanitarian grounds to return to their families. Aman Aman, the movement's Secretary General, told a news conference in Juba. Sudan's ambassador Jamal Malik told the news conference in Khartoum welcomed the handover of the prisoners, although he said they were not members of South Sudan's armed forces. Sudan's government has in recent years been pursuing efforts to reach accords with rebel groups across the country and end decades of conflict that have displaced millions of people and killed hundreds of thousands. According to reports, some rebels from the country's south and from the troubled western region of Darfur have already signed agreements to cease hostilities. But a faction of Sudan's People Liberation Movement North, led by Abdulaziz Ol-Hilu, who has control over significant forces and territory from his stronghold in South Kordofan, has held out. Talks between the rebel and Khartoum, mediated by South Sudan, have so far failed to hew final accords, although progress has been made. The handover of the captive by the movement rebel group signals a good intention from the rebels to continue to engage in talks, said Tut Galiluk Manime, South Sudan's presidential advisor on security affairs, who is heading the mediation team.
Benin's army has said it fought a terrorist attack in the country's northwest, killing 8 gunmen suspected of operating from neighboring Burkina Faso and Niger. Security forces have faced more than a dozen militant incursions since last year's concerns continue to mount over the spread southward of violence from the Sahel-linked Islamic State group and Al-Qaeda. In the early hours of last week Wednesday, terrorists attempted to infiltrate Matari town where they were planning to torch a complex attack, launched or military spokesperson Ebenezer said through the media. Let's now talk health on the African continent, where we shall be stopping in the East African country of Uganda, where the World Health Organization chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, during a virtual meeting, said a clinical trial of vaccines that could potentially combat the Sudan strain of Ebola driving an outbreak in the East African country of Uganda could start within weeks. Take a listen to the details.
Uganda and the whole of East Africa can now see light at the end of a tunnel in the fight against Ebola. World Health Organization Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said a clinical trial of vaccines potentially combat the Sudan strain of Ebola, driving an outbreak in Uganda that could start within weeks. The East African country declared an outbreak of Ebola on the 20th of September and said infections were being caused by the Sudan strain. So far, Uganda's health ministry has confirmed a total of 54 Ebola cases and 19 deaths, including health workers. They have been worried the spread of the infection in the country could be difficult to contain since there is no vaccine of the strain. For now, the infections are concentrated in a cluster of 5 districts in central Uganda. In a virtual address to a meeting of Africa regional health officials in Uganda's capital Kampala, Tedros said several vaccines are currently being developed that could deal with the Sudan strain. 2 of those vaccines could be put in clinical trial in Uganda in the coming weeks pending regulatory and other approvals from the Ugandan government, he said. Our primary goal now is to rapidly control and contain its outbreak to protect neighboring districts as well as neighboring countries, explained Tedros. Tedros did not give details of the vaccine due for trial, including the names or which firm developed them. Ebola, a hemorrhagic fever, mainly spread through contact with bodily fluids of an infected person. Symptoms of this viral disease include intense weakness, muscle pain, headaches, and a sore throat, vomiting, diarrhea, and rashes, amongst others. Although it has no vaccine, the WHO has previously said the Sudan strain is less transmissible and has shown less fatality rate in previous outbreaks than Ebola Zaire.
To conclude this newscast, we now talk Cameroon, where inaccessible roads, flooded houses and schools and fields are submerged following heavy rains. The scenery in Cameroon's northern town of Yagua is one of devastation. Since August, the far north region has been experiencing floodings caused by heavy rainfalls, the overflowing of rivers, and the bridging of dikes. The Ministry of Territorial Administration visited the disaster-stricken region last week Wednesday. This year's floods have been particularly devastating, and on the wards where the forecasters had already predicted that there would be a lot of flooding, said Paula Tanganji, the Minister of Territorial Administration in Cameroon. Ladies and gentlemen, it's with that brief on Cameroon that we put a stop to this midday newscast over for you television. I have been Jakes Nabuse for presentation. Do have a great day in company of our programs.